Oh, let me swallow.
We are swallowing, Gail.
Fortunately, phones take a while to swallow.
So we are back. I think we are back. And, okay.
Okay. We're back. It is approximately 10:30 and we're going to discuss the actuarial options that we discussed in the breakouts on September 22nd. Chris Roop has provided a document which is on the table over there, which goes through what each of the groups came up with. And he's prepared to go through it. Thank you, Chris.
Morning, everyone. Chris Roop, Joint Fiscal. So the documents that are before you are my attempt to take that really goofy spreadsheet that I typed up a couple weeks ago and circulated around and convert that into something that's a little bit easier to read. You know, the spreadsheet was really intended for expedience to accelerate the conversation with the actuary. But I didn't want to add time on the front end by making it overly pretty. So did that on the back end by creating these two documents. So these should summarize in plain English what with the feedback that we received 2 meetings ago in the readouts from the small groups, as well as the notes that Scribe sent me after the fact, and then typed it into something and applied some sort of assumptions to how the actuaries can start putting things together to model the combined impacts. So the first document, the one with the staple, we call this actuarial request number 4. And there's 3 sections here that talk about the group F, the group C, and the teacher group's requests for actuarial modeling. So the first one, and I can answer some questions to this, but I want to provide sort of a high level overview because we could get in the weeds real quick, was there were several different one-time and recurring revenue options that the Visas group was interested in taking a look at. So we put that in a chart along with 2 different employee contribution options and asked the actuaries to put some models together that show what each of the 2 revenue options would look like with each of the 2 employee contribution options. So that is sort of and there's the description column here attempts to explain what those ideas were based on what was voiced in the meeting and what the notes that the working group Scribe sent me after the fact. And those were really intended to go to the actuary just to make sure they understood what they needed to model and with what assumptions. So the first page going on to the second page really talks about the revenue scenarios that the group F group was interested in taking a look at. And then there were also some options going on to the bottom of page 2, on to page 3 and 4 that look at benefit change options, primarily around the COLA. So in order to try to get a good feel of, all right, what would happen if we take those revenue options that were just talked about on page 1 and page 2, then apply them to a couple different COLA options? What would the combined impact be on the actuarial math of that entire package deal? So if you read vertically down, you can see which assumptions we've asked them to add, or which options we've asked them to add into each modeling scenario. So the first one, COLA F1, I numbered these things to try to correspond to what employee groups so I could keep them all straight. So if you see F1, that means we're talking about group F. C1, talking about group C. So F1 was to look at the COLA threshold on the first 24,000 of income. So we've asked the actuaries to apply that to each of the 4 different revenue scenarios that they'd model in the first piece. The second COLA option was do the COLA threshold at 24,000, but index the 24,000 to CPI after FY24. COLA option 3, 4, and 5, we asked them to put all the different scenarios because they are not likely to the sequencing of how you apply the options matters for the analysis, but running these after the fact should just be a good data point to be like, all right, what happens if you also do this? What happens if you also do that? So those would be changing the CPI COLA thresholds to 0% minimum and 4% maximum. delaying the onset of a COLA until a member has been retired for at least 24 months, and then delaying until they've been retired for at least 36. So that's COLA 3, F3, F4, and F5. We also, and I made a note of this, it's not on the chart, but I made a note of this in the middle of page 4 that at the Visas Group's request, we've also asked them to model just the impact of taking a look at F3 combined with F4 and F3 combined with F5. So overall, I should have started with this. We've asked them to give us what the impact of all these would be on an individual basis as well, in addition to the combined. So that's just the one sort of exception of two specific options that folks were interested in seeing combined without a whole lot of other broader things. The max benefit cap, we then asked them to apply. What would happen if, in addition to all these other changes, you allow folks to increase their maximum benefit by 1% of AFC for every year they work beyond the current maximums after July 1st, 2022. So we made that clarification because the intent here was to encourage people to work that extra year or that extra increment. So it would be for service, for additional years of service worked after that date. So if I already had 40 years of service, I wouldn't retroactively see my future benefit go up. It would all be about that extra increment. That's the high level overview of the sort of specific options that folks were interested in looking at for group F. I did ask the actuaries to run 2 versions of this. One that would do, just for comparative purposes, one would show applying all these changes to all actives as of July 1st. The other would be to exempt actives within 5 years of normal retirement eligibility from the COLA changes only. So we can see just roughly what would happen, because going back to, you want to avoid unintended consequences of making a change to the benefit structure that might encourage folks who can retire right now to retire right now. What would it look like if we exempted folks who are within 5 years of normal retirement eligibility, just from the COLA change, not from the contribution, the phased in contribution increases or the max benefit, because those things may not be as much of a change to the actual retirement benefit as the COLA. So that would be the piece that we held harmless. I should say negative change to the benefit.
And that benefit may, entice those people to keep working.
Exactly. It wouldn't make sense to exempt people who are close to retirement eligibility right now from that. And in addition, we asked, and this third paragraph on page 4 speaks to this. We asked them to give us an analysis or model, if they can, what would happen if a payment was offered, like an annual bonus payment, to encourage folks to continue working with a cap of 5 years on that bonus payment, with the caveats that it would not come from pension assets and would not be included in the AFC calculations. We don't know what the annual benefit amount would be either. So we know it wouldn't have, we wouldn't be taking money out of the fund to do that. And everything is very hypothetical here. So I'm not sure to what extent they can give us a precise model, but we did ask them to give us some analysis and some opinions on what are the things we need to be thinking about if this is a recommendation that we want to go down, and see what types of conversation the inquiry will prompt. Are there any questions with the group F section before we move on? Sir.
Just wanted to thank you, Chris. We developed a lot of these and didn't lay them out in specific scenarios as you have. I think you captured all of these different ways you can look at it very well for us to, and I think it'll be useful for us when it comes back. So just wanted to thank you.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
No problem. And the actuaries are so much smarter than I am. So they are going to come up with a format that makes more sense than my chicken scratch will. But my goal here was to try to make sure that they had a good sense of what you all were interested in looking at and within what parameters, so they can go back and run their models and build their exhibits in the way that makes the most sense from their expertise. So I think we're in a good spot with that.
So Chris, can I say, I do not believe that the actuaries are any smarter.
Yes, they are.
They just have a different set of knowledge.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And also for your clarifying questions and stuff about number 5.
Yep. And we're gonna get to that one afterwards too.
Chris, I just want to thank you as well for, I really like the way you described that last paragraph there in terms of getting the actuary to give us input on what we should be thinking about in terms of some of those incentives. I think that's gonna be really helpful. Thank you.
And of course, and within all of this conversation around modeling incentives or what would happen if you do the 1% AFC, max benefit increase, there's a huge caveat around all of this. And it's that we don't have experience right now to inform what assumptions to apply. So we can apply generic assumptions. We can think of, let's assume that 50% of the people will retire this year, 4% that year. And based on what came out of that conversation 2 meetings ago, we did send those notes to the actuary. But just for everybody's awareness, there's a caveat that you never necessarily know when you give folks options, what options they're going to choose, how long they're going to choose it, and who the members are who choose it. So all of that means there's some degree of actuarial risk when we think about what the future consequences are likely to be from any of these incentives. But hopefully, the actuaries will give us something that guides us in our recommendations to make sure that we're putting forth something that makes sense and isn't going to result in, huge actuarial losses. Right, moving on to section VSERS Group C. In this section, we asked the actuaries to apply the same revenue scenarios that we looked at on the first page. The only real changes are on page 5, and this is just reworked a little bit differently because this is a more straightforward analysis. We asked them to apply 2 different employee contribution scenarios to those 4 revenue scenarios. One would be the phased-in increase over 3 years of employee contributions by 0.45% a year. And the second option was to do tiered rates based on salary percentiles. So we asked them to take a look at modeling what those impacts would be. And we also, on the max benefit cap, there was some conversation at the last meeting about what our assumed adoption rate should be. So we took that and made a slight recalculation on the out years just to make sure the math added up to 100. And the assumptions we applied was that that max benefit cap increase, that 50% of the members would retire status quo and not really be moved by that provision. 10% would then retire each year between ages 51 and 53, and then 5% each year between ages 54 and 57. And the max benefit cap changes are also detailed here, where there's a previous analysis done using similar assumptions without the sort of out year changes, but about what would happen if you increase the max benefit by 1% of each year worked. But this also couples an increase in the mandatory retirement age from 55 to 57. And it does not increase the optional normal retirement age, it's the mandatory normal retirement age. And then C2, it's a similar construct just with the 2% of AFC cap. And the reason why 2% is used here and the other groups is because the benefit multiplier is higher for group C, it's 2.5%. So picking 2% here is still lower than their benefit multiplier. If you applied 2% to other groups that had a lower benefit multiplier than 2%, you would result in an actuarial loss. And on a similar vein, we asked them to prepare some analysis on this idea of COLA risk sharing, where if the actuarial investment rate of return meets or exceeds the assumed rate of return, status quo COLA would apply. But if it falls short of the assumed rate of return from a given year, the COLA is limited to 1%. So again, this is one of those things where it's really hard to predict the future, and it's hard to know in any given year whether we are going to hit the actuarial rate of return or not. It's also difficult to predict what inflation will be from year to year. But the actuaries should be able to take a look at, what is the probability of us meeting or exceeding based on our prior performance and where our assumptions are right now. What's the likelihood that we'll be higher or lower in any given year? So they'll hopefully be able to provide us something at a rather high level that can inform that conversation. Are there any other questions about the Group C section?
Well, I just wanted to thank you for that, and thank you for adding the one-time and recurring revenue thing, which we did not discuss when we broke out. But I think to have a consistent picture between Group F and Group C, it's good to look at that And also, as you said, we're going to be able to see how each of these operate separately. So, I mean, I think that's a good addition. Thank you for that.
Then the final section, which I had the great pleasure of serving as scribe to, is the teacher section. And that conversation involved modeling two combined revenue scenarios. One that mixed one-time and recurring revenue. And the details of that go on from page 5 on to page 6. So in both scenarios, modeling was suggested to look at the impact of putting 97.5 million of one-time revenue. That number roughly corresponds to 65% of the $150 million that's currently in reserve. And then two different recurring revenue options. One scenario looks at a $32.5 million base year of funding. The second at a $50 million base year of recurring revenue funding. And then layering on two different employee contribution scenarios. One was incremental increases of 0.25% a year for 4 years for active members who currently pay 5%. So they would go from 5% to 6% by FY26. For the actives currently paying 6%, there would be 2 years of 0.25% increases. So by FY26, they would be at 6.5%. The other one was to replace the current flat rates with progressive contributions beginning in FY23. So 5.5% on the first 40,000 of income, 6.25 on income between 40 and 60,000, 7% on income from $60,001 to 80,000, and 7.75% on income above 80. And that was asked to be thrown into modeled with revenue scenario 2. There were also, similar to the VSERS groups, there was interest in modeling the impact of different changes to the COLA. So we, and similar to VSERS, we asked the actuaries to run 2 versions of this, one with applying the COLA change to all actives and one exempting those who are within 5 years of normal retirement eligibility from those COLA changes. The first COLA change was maintaining the current funding situation to calculate the COLA, but do so on the first $48,000 of retirement benefit, and then 5% of the CPI on retirement benefit above $48,000. The working group wanted to model that with the revenue scenario 1 model that's detailed above on page 5 and 6. The second COLA option is a tiered COLA structure where the first $20,000 of retirement benefit would receive a COLA of 100% of CPI within the current minimums and maximums, but instead of being 50%, it would be 100%. Then 50% of CPI on benefit between 20,000 and 40,000. So that would be kind of status quo for income within that bracket. Then 25% of CPI on benefit above 40,000. And the group was interested in modeling that with revenue scenario 2. The third COLA option was this sort of idea of a vested COLA where you needed to, we maintain the current COLA formula and structure, but you'd have to work at least 15 years in order to receive a COLA in retirement. And the group was interested in modeling that with revenue scenario 1. And just like with the VSERS group, similar construct around the max benefit cap increasing by 1% of AFC for each year actually worked beyond 33.34 years for group C2. The reason why it's group C2 only is because the folks who are not in group C2 are likely already eligible for retirement. So this would really just be pertaining to the folks who are the vast majority of the active workforce is in group C2. And it would be, the 33.34 is where they currently hit their maximum benefit cap based on their current benefit multiplier. And similar to the groups C and group F, we asked the actuary for an opinion on creating a new option for folks to only this one instead of having a bonus payment. We asked them to take a look at what would happen if active employees were given an option to freeze their pension benefit upon reaching either the rule of 90 or 65 years old and keep working. Upon entering the freeze, the members would keep working, but they would stop paying contributions into the pension system, thereby either keeping those contributions or having the option to redirect those pre-tax contributions into, a deferred comp or some other supplemental retirement account to save for their retirement. And they would also stop accruing, their AFC would stop going up for benefit calculation purposes. So they would not get a benefit paid out until they actually separate and retire. But this would allow folks to choose that if they are already eligible for retirement, they can keep working and save a little bit of money in their paycheck if they find that advantageous to do so. And that may appeal to members of the workforce who do not expect their AFC to increase a whole lot in their final couple of years of service, and who otherwise, want to keep working and retain some of their earnings.
Or who think their earnings may decrease, because maybe they want to move to a different location.
Yep, it's an option. Yep. And everybody will make, to your point, everybody will make their value proposition, their calculation, their own value proposition. But this would give folks the ability to save some money out of their paychecks and also and continue working, which obviously translates into other actuarial savings on the pension and the OPEB, but also it would avoid the pension system from accruing any additional liability for benefits during those years that are worked, from your salary growing and accruing more service credits. Are there any questions on this before we move on to request 5? Okay, we are not going to get results back from this for several weeks. I did get a cost estimate back. The actuaries, just for context, expect this will be about a $60,000 request.
Sorry, say that again.
60,000.
You're in the wrong line of business. That's what it's.
Sorry.
Chris, did they ask any clarifying questions of you that they had a chance to understand what you're asking of them?
They have not asked me any clarifying questions at this point. I will give a shout out to Will Krewald in the treasurer's office. As always, he's always my gut check to make sure things make sense. And whenever we have our conversation, he typically asks questions that I never thought would be questions. And we provide the clarifying information at that stage to send the actuary. So I know they're in the middle of juggling the actuarial valuations and these requests, but I have not received any follow-up requests for clarification yet.
Thank you.
The budget for the whole actuarial process was $100,000. Is that right?
We have a total budget of $200,000 for actuary and legal and any other professional services.
We were thinking more 50,000 for legal. 100. There's still plenty. My question is this: if we want more scenarios or something that we have, there's still
There is some room, yes.
Well, when we
There-
get these back, I assume that we're going to start looking at them and then try to mix and match again and ask for another round.
There's not an enormous amount of room, but there is some room for additional work.
The legal firm, we said that was 50,000. Is that what ICE Miller agreed to?
I believe so.
Okay,
Pivot to request 5.
However, I should say, if we do request additional legal work, it could add to the cost.
Before we go to 5, there's one thing I'm trying to wrestle with on request 4 here. I guess that's look one-time revenue and recurring revenue for both Group F and Group C. Because I kind of think of those as accruing to the system,
Right.
where the groups are subsets under the system. And, we'll have to make sure we're kind of not double counting those.
No, it wouldn't be double counted. We just want to have a complete picture. No, you're right. The revenue goes to the entire system, but we wanted to clarify that we want to see what happens when you mix the revenue and the benefit changes for both systems. But no, your point is right. We can't double count the one-time and recurring revenue. It would be the same. That's why we use the same. We asked them to apply the Group C scenarios to the same revenue that we used for the Group F.
I mean, I would be open to applying, funds for each group C and Group F, if that's what we go. just hadn't.
Duly noted.
Looking at it, I hadn't thought about that kind of wrinkle until now about keeping those, just making sure we're clear about how we're thinking about those.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so request 5, this will be a much shorter one-page one. This is a separate request because it's a little more complicated and we needed some follow-up conversation to really understand what was being asked here. So we asked the actuaries to provide us with analysis on the actuarial impact of allowing certain VSERS Group F members to enroll in a benefit with the same provisions as Group C. So that's the law enforcement and public safety group. The universes of Group F members are the Department of Corrections employees, only them in Group F who are currently covered by the provision that allows them to retire at age 55 with 20 years of service with an unreduced benefit. The second universe is the DOC employees of that same universe, but everybody else that doesn't work for DOC that is included in that universe. So the statutory language is pasted right here. So you can see that, there are some other employees who work at places like, Woodside or the Vermont State Hospital or their successor facilities who may not be DOC employees, but they are covered by that same provision. So analysis was to look at both of those cohorts of Group F members and basically solve for the question of if you gave these members an option to switch from their current group to the Group C benefit, or put all new hires in that new benefit, what would the actuarial cost of that be? Well, what would the required contribution need to be to make sure that that doesn't result in an actuarial loss to the system? And we asked them to apply 2 different assumptions. One was that everybody would move to a status quo Group C benefit that looks just like it is now. The other one would be taking a look at Group C, but applying the changes we asked them to model an actuarial request for. So those changes really are around the COLA and the max benefit increase. So they're not massively different changes, but we wanted to make sure the analysis captured both of those. And with this one, the actuaries are in the process of working on a cost and time estimate for us. So that can inform whether everybody, how much money are we going to have left to do any other follow-ups, and how long is this work going to take? This is a rather complicated analysis, and I know right now there's some communication of just trying to make sure that they have the right data set of the universes of active employees to model. So this is moving forward, but on a parallel track to request for.
Chris, I believe I know the answer to that question. Just for clarification purposes, what the intent here to be to allow for employees, but our Department of Corrections employees to essentially freeze their Group F pension and then start a pension under the Group C pension, or pick up the entire benefits that they have accrued. That they earned under Group C all.
I think that the intent here, and Leona, please keep me honest, because I don't profess to speak for you, but I think the intent here is if you provided people with an option to switch benefits, what would the cost be to switch those plans to make sure it's actuarially neutral to the system?
So that tells me that it would be as if they were earning the Group C all along versus freezing the Group F and restarting the Group C the next day.
Correct.
Can you remind me which DOC employees this covers?
The statutory, well, they are drilling down a precise number right now, but the statute says they have to have 20 years of service as facility employees of DOC, as Department of Corrections employees who provide direct security and treatment services to offenders under supervision in the community, or at these other successor facilities that are run by other agencies.
Thank you.
DOC does a fairly sizable workforce, though.
Mm-hmm. So I don't think we'll get here, but I would at some point like to see us figure out if we can't get sheriffs in here too. I know, everybody hates to hear me say that, but
Figure out what to.
sheriffs
Uh-huh.
are, some sheriffs in the state are part of VSERS and some are part of the muni system, and it's a mess. And their employer costs just went up. In my sheriff's department, for example, the employer costs for his few employees just went up by $80,000 this last year. Anyway, I'd love to have us do that too, but that's another complication.
Yep. And that's a great point that, system-wide across the state, the ESER's employer cost went up by about 4% of payroll for retirement costs from last year to this year.
Any comments, questions? Did anybody see anything in here that came out of one group that they thought was particularly creative that their group didn't think of? I'll just say, I really liked the troopers suggestion about the tiered contribution. I thought that was pretty creative. I like that.
I think, Jeanette, I think looking at the vesting COLA was interesting. I mean, in my head, I was trying to think, how do you capture something like that? And what having 15 years of service to get the COLA, it'll be an interesting thing to look at.
Yeah,
I'm just thinking, the other groups are talking about percentiles when they were looking at the contributions. So, and we took a slightly different approach using numbers, but I'd be curious about the percentile difference for the teacher contributions. See how those break down.
Oh,
Instead of the 40 to 60, I'm just curious how percentiles it would actually break down.
Yeah, I agree. The vesting, well, that's a really interesting concept. I also thought we looked at a COLA threshold, applying some portion of a COLA to the amount above the threshold is interesting as well, and as well as the idea of giving folks the option to freeze the benefit if that works for their situation. I'd be interested to see what the numbers look like for providing that type of option.
So Dan, I'm curious if from your members, I'm sure that people you probably talked with people about this, but just in terms of the raising the mandatory retirement age to 57, if that's had any pushback from people or haven't they gotten into that level of detail yet?
I've mentioned it to a few people, and I don't think there's going to be push, because as John and I discussed, you have the option.
Yeah.
And I think that's the bigger thing. I was just thinking I don't know legally what would have to do. I mean, I assume some type of change.
Yeah, I think
legislatively.
we're on pretty safe ground, given that federal law enforcement is already at age 57 for retirement. So I think that's fine. And just to emphasize, people can still, law enforcement can still retire at 50. There is absolutely zero requirement that they retire at 57.
Right.
It just gives them an incentive to continue to work from 50 to 57.
Yep. And
So no one is going to have to work to 57 unless they choose to.
Right.
Absolutely. And like I with at least the few that I've talked to and talked about that, as long as we have the option, we can, people will choose what they choose and go where they go and do what they do. It's only helpful. So.
For good years of service out of good people.
Yeah.
Anybody anybody else have any saw anything that they liked or questioned or that was especially interesting or creative? Okay. All right, so is everybody okay with these? With this discussion?
Yeah, I think it's really helpful to have it like this, because I've tried to talk with some folks about it. I was having trouble conveying exactly what we discussed in our small groups. So to have it, that description feels broken out. I think it's very helpful.
It is. All right, so thank you, Chris. Of course. Yes, that was well done. So Sarah, did you have any questions about that?
No, that's a great layout of the different ideas on the table. I like it.
Thank you. Thanks. So our next topic of discussion is not here until 11:30, but I see no reason to not move forward. So we were going to talk about discuss the logistics for the November 1st public hearing. And people had thoughts about how it might be framed, how it, where Gail has a public notice ready to go out, but I think that if we come up with some parameters today or some suggestions, we can add that to the public notice. And it's November 1st, 6 to 9 we have, and it'll be a combination of in-person and virtual. Is that what we've decided so far?
I didn't know the in-person part, but was the thought on that it would be members of the task force potentially being in person?
Or people coming in
People.
person? No?
I think where we left off, it was all virtual.
Yeah.
Oh, did we?
That's
Oh,
what I thought.
oh,
I
okay.
think we may have discussed whether we can have people attend in person, but we need to check with powers that be that control this building, which
Yeah,
is not me.
I think that we heard that Gail told us they've done a couple public hearings that way,
Oh.
that combined. Is that not, didn't I?
That is true, yeah. So we can do it any way that the task force pleases.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so I guess the first question is, how do we want to do it?
My recommendation, because it runs through 9 PM, we just do this virtually. It's leaving here at 9 PM to get to wherever our homes are. It's gonna put people, in my case, it would be 10:30 or something like that. And I'm sure that I'm not the furthest away, so.
I guess everybody. Okay, all right, so it will be virtual. So how do we have suggestions for how to frame this so that it becomes meaningful for our deliberations?
I have a quick
Yeah,
question. So just going back to, since it's going to be on Zoom, when will we be able to get that link so that we can make sure it's widely shared?
Well, I think that the way I would guess, Gail, you can correct me here, is that it would be put on our committee agenda. And that people would the invite be put on the agenda? Yeah.
I think how it works is people can sign up. Once they sign up, they'll be sent via email a link, because there'll be, you don't want people being able to speak who aren't on the list of those speaking. So I think in the public hearings we run in the virtual world, that's what we've done. And there will also be a YouTube feed for people who want to listen in during the 6 to 9 time period where the hearing is going on. But I think they'll be sent, and the chairs, the co-chairs will have a list of the witnesses, and we'll call them in order. Sometimes what happens is people aren't where they're supposed to be when we would like them to be, but typically if they get in line, we can somehow figure out how to get them in so that they do get a chance to testify, maybe just not in the order in which their request to testify were received.
The legislature was Zoom bombed early on. So our policy is that we don't allow anyone into the Zoom room unless we can identify them in advance. So if somebody shows up in the waiting room on Zoom as, say, My Vermont, we cannot let that person in the room unless they've given us notice as to who they are and they're on the purpose.
Yeah, that's right. And there's actually only one witness in the Zoom at any one time. And as soon as somebody finishes their testimony, it's somebody's responsibility to get them out of the Zoom room. So, I mean, that's typically how it works, just so you don't have multiple witnesses interrupting each other or the hearing.
We would all be present in the Zoom room.
Yes, we all would. And any member of the public who wants to listen can listen via YouTube.
And their time, the witnesses are timed, right? They get, what, 2 to 3 minutes? Or at least-
Well, that's something we should probably determine today is how much time we want to give them, but typically it's 2 or 3 minutes. And there is a time. I've been tasked with that responsibility in the past to keep people on time, and you try to do it very nicely. Most people understand, and we've had a clock, which switches from green to yellow to red based on how much time they have. So we've tried to be nice, as nice as possible about that. If somebody's finishing up their remarks and it's pretty clear that they are, we let them finish their remarks. But if they're just going on and on and on, then there's a difficult choice, which is left to somebody to shut them off.
I found myself in that situation in a public hearing before too.
Of being shut off?
No, of wondering what to do with someone who's well over their time.
No.
Again, a recommendation, do this, give everyone 2 minutes. And if we find that a fewer number of individuals signed up for testimony, extend it to 3. It's harder to go because people will do up their testimony and then read it. And it's amazing how quickly people can read to get the entire thing in, and they will practice it. But if all of a sudden you go from 3 minutes to 2 minutes,
Yeah.
that's going to be all but impossible for people who plan it.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think if we could just put a note on that document where people are signing up, that it's starting in 2 minutes. However, if we don't have all the time slots filled, you will be granted an additional minute, just so people are prepared.
People can all say more. I know that.
And I know people don't like time limits, but they are handy because some people will show up without written statements and will continue. Like I've done the budget hearings. They go out into communities and people will take like 15, 20 minutes and it cuts them off and it exhausts everybody. And not that there aren't good points to be made, but process.
Yeah.
Just one recommendation also is made. I don't know if our committee has an email address, but an email address that we could send out with the notice so that people can provide the written testimony if they want, or if they're unable to attend, or if they get cut off and they have more to say, that they can just provide it in written testimony that maybe could be summarized for us.
Yeah.
Would it be the intent to hear from all witnesses who sign up?
So we usually make enough slots that
Mhm.
people stay on time, get everyone.
I'm just thinking if we have more witnesses than time, does that mean we have to continue the meeting at another time.
I've never been to a public hearing where we have.
Yep.
Had continued. Sometimes if you have 3 more people or 5 more people, you can extend the time. But if you have 100 more people,
Mhm.
I'm not sure that you would do that. We also could change it from 6 to 9 to 5:30 to 8:30, which means that we would have a little bit of slush room at the end after 8:30 to, because I don't know that anybody wants to go till 9:30 or 10. I don't know about that.
I feel strongly that we need to hear from everybody who wants to provide testimony. So I don't know, I think we should have the signups happen in advance. And I think that if we have more people signed up than we have time for, then we need to consider having a second hearing or extending that hearing into the night as long as it takes to hear from everyone.
We can, I'm thinking here, how many minutes, I mean, how many people?
I just did the math.
2 minutes is 30 people an hour.
It's 30, but we have to, you have to break out time. There's typically introductory remarks. You know, you go through the ground rules of how it's gonna work. That takes a couple minutes, you know, just like the lights, you know, how you're gonna come in, how you're gonna come out. So you're not gonna get, if you just divide by 2 minutes, you're gonna get 90 people, but there isn't enough time for 90 people.
So maybe 70.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can check with Mike Durant, because he's done this multiple times. He'll be able to tell us exactly.
Yeah,
How
I
many
don't know,
people?
like 4 minutes a person, and that would include introductory comments, plus like people coming
Yeah.
into the room, being like, is this thing on? Or, you know, all that.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
No, there are some technology issues that come up. You know, you can't hear people for a while. What we typically do in a situation like that is say, we'll come back to you later and go to somebody else who hopefully has a better connection. But we do try to hear from everyone who has signed up. And typically, the other thing that happens is that everyone that signs up does not necessarily show up. And so the number of people that you think you have is unlikely to be the number of people who actually testify.
That's another good reason to collect the written testimony.
Yeah. And that is, in public hearings where I have been, where there are still people left that haven't testified, we ask them to send in their testimonies.
I think to Kate's point, we should hear from anybody who wants to speak. I agree with that to an extent. And this isn't negative to you guys, but particularly because you guys are well organized, there'll be talking points from people. Hear from 30, 40, 50, 60 people who are literally uttering the same phrase, which we get the emails. So like when these things happen, we get the form emails. They're all like, we get it after a certain number. Like if people are saying something unique, that's one thing, but if they're saying like the same 5 or 6, like literally verbatim talking points, I don't think we need to bring in 100 people to do that. Like, that's the balance. So, I mean, I explained to, some of your members back home that sometimes those form emails aren't always the best ones to actually communicate, especially if I was your student or I worked with you or something like that. I know that's too sticky, but just, I would just say that to your members. I'm sure you'll have some preps and that's fine, but we even in the gun debates, another issue, literally sides have their same exact talking points. It just becomes point counterpoint, and we're hearing the same thing, literally the same thing from everybody, no matter the side. So I think trying to keep it unique and have people have their own experiences would be most helpful if we're gonna try to bring in numbers. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah.
So is it start time of 6?
Well, that's what we had. It was 6 to 9. I'm willing to. I just suggested that we might move it to 5:30, just to give us a little bit of a slush time at the end, because I don't know. I don't feel strongly about one way or the other. I know that a lot of the public hearings, when they're held here in the building, they tend to go like from 5:30 to 8:30 or 9, or sometimes they're 6 to 9, but I've been at ones that start at 5:30. Some people can do it at 5:30 and some people won't be available till 9. So it was just a suggestion.
For me, if it's virtual, crawl into bed as soon as it's over, I guess.
I don't know, it's still going on. Listen from there.
Yes,
Uh,
just don't fall asleep.
Turn your video off.
You know, just, and again, it's just me personally, I won't speak for everyone, but the time to me is, it's more important to me to hear people and let them say what they need to say than worry about how much time is it gonna be.
Well, I can't do something like that.
No, no.
Yeah.
No, I can't either. So far, we've decided it's all gonna be on Zoom. We'll have an email where people can send written testimony, either instead of or in addition to, or what they're actually going to read to us. They can, any of those 3 options. We'll set it at 2 minutes to start with. And put a note on there that depending on the number of people that sign up, it may be more, but 2 minutes really is. And if you do the numbers that John just suggested, 44 minutes a person, you're talking about 45 or 50 people. Right?
Collectively among all 3 cohorts.
Well, the public,
Right.
yeah. I mean,
Oh,
it isn't,
or anyone.
it isn't going to, it isn't going to be just.
That's true.
It can be anybody.
Taxpayers, anybody.
Yeah, yeah. Superintendents, principals.
Mhm.
Well, but it doesn't have to be anybody connected to state employees or schools or anything else. It can be Joe Schmo from down the corner who owns a grocery store who just wants to say something.
Mhm.
That we're not going to ask people why they're there or who they represent.
Mhm.
They're there, yeah.
Just to clarify, when will the link for people to testify be available for people to sign up? Just knowing that people book up fast. November 1st is a couple weeks away. Is that something that we'll have available by the end of this week?
When do we send out the public notice, Gail, for a November 1st one? Do you remember?
So first it gets drafted and then it's approved by the chairs.
Yeah.
And then it goes to editing. And so it does take a few days to turn it around and get it ready to publicize. So I'm thinking probably early next week.
Are there any notice requirements as far as timing? I mean, I know there's nothing specific to Act 75, but didn't know if there was something broader that legislative public hearings.
I don't think so.
Public.
It's not the same as
Not like municipality, we get the
Yeah.
48 hour.
because you're not making any decisions, so it isn't really a meeting. It's a,
Yeah, no, I just,
Yeah.
in my work, we have to give 30 days notice for public hearing, so I was just wondering if there was
no.
equivalent.
So if we got it out, the end of even the end of next week is 3 weeks. It's not?
And there's
Then
notice
next
2
week,
weeks.
They would go to like 1 week away.
2, right? No, beginning of next week
Be
is
like
2
one
weeks.
full week, I think.
If it's out on Monday, it's a full 2 weeks. Then
Yeah.
if it's out on Monday,
If
but
it's-
We can push to get it drafted ASAP.
Yeah, we will, but
There's some back-end technology that has to happen too, as far as the sign-up process. So I would have to check with IT and make sure that that's feasible, but since we've done it before, it shouldn't be problematic.
You hear Corey's point in that, I think that testimony will be of most utility to us if it's original. I guess I'm throwing this out there, what do we want to hear? Like, what are we going to use the testimony for? I think we want to avoid, hearing about what happened last year, or, I think we want to kind of hope that it's constructive to what our task is here. I don't know if there's a way to provide guidance to those providing testimony as to what we'd like to, specifically what we'd like to hear in testimony, not the specifics, but the broader issues.
I don't know how much of this report or anything of our work people have seen, but I think feedback on where we're going. You're not gonna stop. Some people are gonna be like, you can't touch anything. I think that's an unrealistic expectation. But I think areas where, what areas of attention are most important to people, and then what areas, are they willing to compromise on, would be what I would want to hear. But again, I understand they're not. But that's what I think would be most helpful to make sure we're trying to work in a way that most people would agree to.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that what is the most helpful is for people not to respond to the treasurer's report or the House report that came out, not dredge that up again, because that's not going to help us at all. But to what are things that you think are reasonable to solve this problem? And that could be anywhere from rob a bank to, I don't know, but that I'd like to hear people talk about what. And Leona, pretty soon I'll just be in your department, so. But that's what I want to hear is suggestions for where we go and how we solve this, not.
Well, and I'd say to your memberships who had an issue with the House proposal and the treasurer's plan, we've heard you, and that's why we're here right now, and why we've been here all summer. Because if your voices weren't heard on those issues, we would have passed something and we wouldn't be sitting here. So I think, going forward, to Jeanette's point, is how to be as constructive as possible. Constructive criticism. None of us are perfect, and we all know, we don't have our actual numbers back, but the flat out, don't touch anything, don't do this. It's okay, we can listen to that all night, or we can, hear really concerns what is employees drive, what drove them to be state employees, what drove them to be teachers, what about the pension they appreciate, going forward, how do we make adjustments that don't hurt the workforce issue any worse than it is, all the concerns you guys have, bring those to light, but also understand that realistically some change has to happen somewhere along the line. Where would you like to see it come from?
And what's important to you? What is important to you as you go forward? Is it really important to you that you be able to retire at a certain age? Is it really important that your contribution, you have a goal? I just think that it would be helpful to hear from people what, I guess it's just repeating what Corey said, but yeah.
I have a thought, and John, I'm going to just preface this by saying, I know when I said this last time, you kind of ran up one side of me and down the other. So this was a long time ago. But I think that, Corey, the only value, not only, scratch that, the value in those talking points and hearing them repetitively is the number of times that you hear it and the magnitude of the issue. And I just keep coming back in my head to, is there some way to survey our organizations? How do we survey people to say, this is essentially what you just said, these are the things we've heard, and click it if that's important to you, or rate these things in order of importance. And then the thing at the bottom that says, if you have a unique component of the story you'd like to share in testimony, or if you'd like to share more about what personally drives you as an educator, please sign up to testify. Thank you for your input. And if you have more,
I mean, I don't personally have a problem, but I feel like a survey of your membership is your union's
Right.
responsibility.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not saying
To
that we would do
provide,
it.
I don't think to enter that into the record somewhere would necessarily be a bad thing. I don't, if the NEA put together a survey and the VSA put together a survey and said, look, here's where we are in this process. What are your thoughts on it? And we saw, I wouldn't, I'm not the chair of this committee, but as a member of this committee, I would have no problem looking at those results and seeing what they were and accepting that. I think that would be much more efficient than the, the talking point thing. I guess my point is, I understand how many members you guys have, and I understand, and I've had dozens, if not hundreds of conversations over the last year and a half on this issue with constituents. So I already know the magnitude of your response. And so I appreciate that. I get it. If you guys need it for the public record, fine. But I think to be more efficient from our perspective and for us to actually go something actionable out of the meeting, I think something a little different, but I don't want to diminish. I understand the magnitude of your membership and how many thousands of Vermonters this impacts. Like, I totally understand that it's on our shoulders. I feel it. I go to, jokingly, like right now we've been going to the high school football games and I see all the teachers I've ever had at those, and trust me, they know I'm on the committee and they all talk, well, I feel this and we take this responsibility very seriously. And so I think, I get your point of the numbers and how many people this impacts, but I think a survey of your membership is fine if that's something you guys want to spearhead in and present to us in this process. I don't know if we can come up with the survey questions.
No, I was implying, I didn't mean to imply this committee would. I just do think that, there are different reasons for different kinds of feedback. And I think the magnitude of numbers is one component of that. It also, structuring questions in a way that says, this is how we've heard you. Does that apply to you? Does this apply to you? Does this apply to you? Does this apply to you? You're gathering some data where some people might feel heard just in doing the survey and not feel the need then to come and say what could sound like talking points. If we're listening to multiple people, and then, but people who have solution possibilities or unique circumstances that they want to communicate would still have that option.
I think that's a good idea. I would suggest that if that's gonna happen, it better happen this week.
Oh, yeah, no.
I mean, just because if you're going to send out a survey to people and ask them to respond, it's gonna take them a while to respond. And then it's gonna take a while to compile those responses. And then those people who, then they have to sign, if they think they still want to say something. I mean, and all of them might still want to say something, but I think that if that's going to happen, it needs to happen. And I would say, I don't know if the state employees are interested in doing the same thing. I mean, that's up to you all, I think, to figure out if you want to do something like that. I do think that while I know that it isn't that there is a value in knowing that many people feel this way, that isn't necessarily what drives decisions. Because if the majority of people came in and said, don't do anything, that doesn't, even if that was the 100% of the people that came in and said that to us, don't do anything. That's not the reality. We have to do something. So I think that when I tell people who come to our just regular committee to give testimony, not in a public hearing, but what I tell them is that this is, don't have 6 people come in and say the same thing to us, because this isn't a popularity contest. Come in and give us some real information and some real ideas, because just because 6 people came into our committee and said this, and only 1 person came in and said this, doesn't mean that this is what's going to happen. And I don't think that was very clear, but I think we know that it's a huge issue and that it's going to affect, about 15,000 people out there, about 30,000 people with active and retirees everywhere. So, and the other thing I would say is that we need to remember that this is a public hearing. And there are other people who may want to come and speak. And so we can't, it doesn't make any sense to have a lot of people coming in and saying the same thing. It takes time then from those people who might have a different perspective. And I know that wasn't very well said, but I don't know how we do this here. When we have a public hearing that's usually about a bill, say the gun bill or the GMO or marriage equality or whatever those things were that we had a lot of public hearings on lately. We usually have the yeses and the nos. And you rotate them, you go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So that because oftentimes you have people come in and sign up right away. So then you have 13 people all saying the same thing, all agreeing or disagreeing. And so I'm not sure how we'll do that here, if we'll somehow have a, hear from the SEA people, NEA people, troopers, and uninterested, interested, but unconnected. Is that?
Unaffiliated.
That's the word, thank you. It's like, so I don't know how we'll handle that. I mean, that's a question I think we should figure out, because if every trooper signs up first, we're going to hear from all the troopers first. And so we need to figure that out. Anybody have any suggestions about how that might work?
So Jeanette, I'll just jump in here and say that when we've worked with Mike Ferrant in the past to try to set up public hearings, when he creates the registration portal, he typically will ask for your name, the town that you're from, your cell phone number if you might be planning to join the meeting by cell phone, just so we can identify you. And then we can ask him to list affiliation. So teacher, state employee, trooper, or Vermonter, I guess would be the other category. Although I suppose most of those people could list that. And in that way, we can see, when we see how many people sign up, we can decide, how we want to order the witnesses to make sure that we get a balance of the different perspectives.
Okay, yeah, that's a good idea. We don't have to make that decision about how to do it until we actually see who signs up. Yeah, that's a good idea.
I do think asking for that information would be important. Though.
Yeah.
Because I was going to mention it even in prompting when an individual witness speaks, that they could say their name, their town, their affiliation. But if we have that beforehand and have the information, we'll save that, might save that step. So.
Yeah.
I think folks are passionate about this, and I think that's what we'll hear in our 2 minutes is passion. And I think that the changes to the pension system are going to affect people in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I would hope that we would hear something with respect to how changes to a pension system are going to affect recruitment and specifically retention. I know that we've already talked about how we have a lot of teachers who are at or near retirement age now. And we've talked about how we might incentivize them to stick around a little longer. But I wonder, as we continue to see the healthcare system chipped away at and the pension system chipped away at, what's going to happen to the teaching workforce in the state. I can only speak to the teaching workforce. I imagine it's the same in the other workforces, but we're not fully staffed. We don't have a driver's ed teacher. We don't have a lit lab person in our building. And so we're not, even with respect to special education, we're not in compliance. Like, what's going to happen when the good people who can retire because they're pissed about the changes that are made? I think that's the kind of passion you're going to hear at this pension hearing, regardless of whether you would like them to come on for 2 minutes and talk about possible solutions. That's not what you're going to hear. It's not what you're going to hear. So I think we should be prepared for what we are going to hear rather than a wish list of what we might want to hear.
Oh, I think you're right. I mean, we can even pose questions that we would like them to address, but they're going to say whatever they're going to say. Yeah.
I think if you have a single mom supporting her family right now, who's a teacher or a state employee or a trooper or whatever, you're going to hear a single mom talk about how changes to the pension system are going to affect her and what it means for retention, whether she may go look for a new job. And then what does that mean for us and our workforce?
So I'd love to ask a follow-up question perhaps on that, because what you just said, Kate, really could indeed be the case that that people will come in and tell us what they are passionate about because it is what's on their mind. And I guess in an ideal world, we 13 sitting around the task force table are presenting our work in a way that invites people to understand that we're looking to find the best possible solution and that the world isn't ending and people don't, I don't know. I mean, I think that the way people receive the process of the task force can in large part either help them to understand that we're looking for the best solution or that we are closing in on the right balance, or it can send people back into their corner to say no change ever at any point. And so I guess I just want to ask the question of all of the employee members of the task force, are we presenting the work that we're doing as being, hey, we're here trying to find the best possible solution?
Well, I would hope that that's how we're presenting to the people out there that, the people we talk to, that we are trying to work on a solution here that saves this system so that it doesn't implode or explode or whatever it would do. Yeah.
Well, I just know that, when I'm dealing with, my coworkers and other people in the state office building that work in, when they asked me about it, I was like, oh, I understand you're like, a pension is a promise, blah, 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 but I was like, understand though, as one who, I'm gonna be honest, I was aware of all this stuff happening in January, February, March, but, and I'm like, oh, I did the rallies and stuff, but I really wasn't as involved as I could have been. And as I've become involved, it's like, I just simply say, all the stuff is on the website. I know that's easy to say, but believe me, there's a lot of stuff on the pension task force website. And it's not just enough to say, the pension is a contract, it's our promise, and don't touch it. I was like, we have to move beyond that. We're not, the labor unions are not at the table, just say, period, no changes, period. We're just saying, hey, let's look at the different options. let's look at revenue, let's look at, okay, possible small, employee contributions, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm telling them, the actuary has the initial, proposals, not that that's set in stone, that's just stuff that's out there, trying to look at solutions. Because I am, and that's what I'm putting out there into my own, BSEA members who contact me, who talk to me about it. I was like, I get that you're saying it's a promise, but that's not gonna get us anywhere. But that's what I'm putting out there. So I'm hoping those BSEA who do call it, some of them probably will, I'm gonna be honest, people have their opinions, right? Of how they feel it should go. And some of them will say, and testify, this is a contract when I started the job 20 years ago, blah, blah, blah. But my response, if I'm asking clients, yes, but we're at a point. If you follow and you read, if you read the preliminary, you follow along on the live streams, on the website, something has to be done. It's not simply enough to just say, it's a contract. I'm not saying something drastic, but something has to be done. So that's what I'm putting out there.
I think that's a good message. And we should put a link to the interim report on the public announcement, right? So that.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Leona said. I mean, it's certainly come up, why, from folks, why be engaged in this process at all? And that's, the point, the reason is to try to identify the best possible solution. And it's not gonna be easy work. But it's difficult. I mean, that's how I communicate to folks, but I can only communicate to so many, of our thousands of members. We have folks, we do webinars to update, but we might have 100 people, which is great turnout, but it's still only a fraction of our membership.
So I think what we've decided is that it's going to be virtual. Did we decide to change the time from 5:30 to 9 or from 5:30 to 8:30 with some slush time at the end, or leave it at 6 to 9?
5:30 to 8:30. Some people still in the queue, it can go to 9. That gives us flexibility and at least keep that plan on what's going on versus saying 5:30 to 9, it could easily go to 9:30.
Yeah.
So typically when we're doing public hearings, we do exactly what I've said, we do 5:30 to 8:30, but then always give room at the end for folks that are in the queue but not yet been able to see.
So do we change it to 5:30? Is that? I mean,
It's fine.
okay. Okay, and is that we will try to get the announcement out by Monday. If we can make all these decisions, get it all down to get it through all the steps that it needs to go through. And it sounds like a lot of steps, but it's important that it be right. We'll give people 2 minutes to start and put it. I don't even know that we need to put a note in there that says if we have fewer people sign up, they might get free. If fewer people sign up, we can just tell them, hey, you got 3 minutes, slow down a little bit.
I would just like to have the note just so people can prepare. I know when I spoke last spring, I think initially I was told I would have 3 minutes and then it got cut down to 2, which, people also get nervous talking in public forums, even if it's on Zoom. So giving them the chance to prepare, I would just have it.
Okay.
I don't think it hurts anything.
Okay, we can put that in there. And we will have an email site where we can send written testimony either in lieu of or in addition to. We will put a link in there to the interim report and to the committee website maybe, because as Leona said, there's a lot of stuff on there that gives even more information. And if somebody has read all of that stuff before they come in, we might want to give them 4 minutes.
I bet somebody will.
And a
But-
gold star.
But some people will be very knowledgeable when they come in. And for those people, some other written testimony would also be valuable.
And
People
we're
will,
going to collect emails and affiliations.
Yeah, emails. If telephone numbers, right, if they're gonna call, if they're gonna come in from another place, and affiliations.
There were pretty framing questions.
my question. People will definitely speak to whatever they want to speak to. But I was just jotting down some possible questions as I heard things around the room. And, why did you choose a career in public service? Obviously, that would only be to the affiliated people. How it changes to the pension system affect you, thinking about Kate's point about the single mom. And then do you have suggestions or ideas that you would like to provide? Or some possible questions if we decide to go down that route. I was just jotting them down as I heard the discussion.
What about a question specific to either recruitment and or retention? Specific.
Doesn't that invite people to plant their line in the sand and say, if you do anything, I will leave my job?
Yes, it would.
I mean, I think we've heard a lot of testimony in the task force about recruitment and retention, and that's been very important. But it seems to me if you use that as a question prompt, it's pretty much inviting someone, opening the door for them to walk in and say, if you make change X, Y, or Z, I will leave this job and go work elsewhere. And I don't think it's helpful for us to hear that. And and I think we're all doing the best that we can to try to make careful and modest changes that are responsive to what we're hearing, what you all are hearing from your colleagues, and what we heard during the legislative session about what is and isn't an acceptable way to change the pension system.
I was wondering if it might be more palatable. This is sort of Corey's language earlier, but he was asking about, like that one question might be, what would be reasonable, or what are the most important elements of the benefits to you? And so what if putting those ideas together, we said something like, what parts of the benefit system, the pension benefit system, what would it be like? Would lead you to continue in your job, or would lead to the best retention potential, or which parts are most important to you?
I think which parts are more important to you. I don't. Not sure about which things would keep you in your job.
The language, yeah.
So I just was thinking about why did you go into public service? And my guess is that at this point, because we're talking about the retirement system, most people are going to have a cue here to say the pension, the benefits. That's what they're going to say. And whether they would have said that in another forum or in another, I don't know, but I think that because we're talking about benefits here, and the pension in particular, that's going to be an automatic response, because that's what they want us to hear. And I'm not distrusting people, but I do think that that's, I mean, why do people take state jobs? Because they live in Montpelier and there's a job opening. I mean, it isn't all altruist. People aren't. I don't know that all public employees think of their job with the state as public service.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's true. I guess I was, coming back to the, DHR set up this kind of value proposition when they were testifying. And, one of the components was the mission aspect. I mean, for me, that's the most important. I jotted that down from something that you said, Corey. What I was actually hoping to get at was not the benefits of the benefits, but to draw out some of the unique stories or unique value decisions that people have. But you basically very well right. That was the pension, which isn't necessarily what that isn't what I think would be most valuable.
Yeah. So I'm going to, Peter has a comment, and I'm going to say that I was at a conference once where we had to say, it was legislators and high-level state employees, and we had to say why we were in public service. And people had all these glorious reasons. It was a little disgusting, actually. I mean, they really, and I said, I'm not going to do it. And they said, yes, you have to do it. And I said, no, everybody said all these wonderful things about serving humanity and all these things. So they made me do it. And I got up and I said, let's face it, we do it for the power, the glory, and the money. And people who knew me were in stitches, and people who didn't hated me. But that's the kind of, when you ask that question, I think that's the kind of answers you get is. Anyway, didn't need it.
No, I was just jotting things down.
Peter?
So I believe that the more that you prompt people with questions, the more skewed the answers will be. And I like the idea of saying what pieces of the pension are most valuable to you. That's not a prompt that's going to lead them down a specific path per se. It addresses our needs with their concerns.
Yeah, I like it too. I mean, it'd be very helpful to this task force to know what is really important to people. And I think that's a very neutral question, just asking it the way that people have suggested, without tying it to any other.
So can we put in the public notice then, when we put that out, just say, as a suggestion, we would like to hear from you, what is the most important part of the pension? What? Say it again.
Someone distill all the questions that you want to include in this and provide.
Yeah, I'll do that. Is that the only question we really want to put in there? This is what's the most important to you, and any suggestions around that?
So remember, they're only going to get 2 minutes. If you ask them a second question, it's going to drive it longer. They may not be able to say what they want to say.
Okay, you're right.
So just one question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I just ask Eric to repeat the ones you read earlier, just to see if there was anything else?
Sure. Why did you choose a career in public service? I just jotted down Peter's as what pieces of the pension are most valuable to you? How would changes to the pension system affect you? Do you have suggestions or ideas that you would like to provide?
And then the other thing we always say is that if you have more, including suggestions, please email us. We always say that. People say it many times during the course of the year.
So do we want to put in the question about what is the most important and leave it at that, or do we want to add second questions? Corey, you look like you were about.
No, I just go back to, I think the most important, I mean, I was just reading some of the comments I've gotten from people I know that I got over this winter. And again, they were very like, I was just one, literally, it was a younger teacher about my age. They were like, I don't mind playing with the money in, the money out, but it's the retirement age. I don't want to work to 67. It's like, to me, like that wasn't like, that would be like the appropriate testament. Cause like, they're very clear showing an opening, like, yeah, if I gotta pay more, or if we gotta make some adjustments there, but the one thing I want to hold on to is to be able to retire at a certain age, or some people might be the COLA or whatnot, but I think hearing that, you know, and just, it's tough, but I think Jeanette and the roles we do, believe it or not, what I think makes us legislators and successful in our communities is being able to have 1,000 different conversations, but start to put together the linear, you know, the trends and the threads that, you know, kind of are common through the conversations we have and understanding. And then, you know, to our other comments, I think the hardest part of our job as elected leaders and all of this is just because we don't agree with you doesn't mean we didn't hear you. And I know some people are going to say things and then say you didn't listen to us. And there's a difference between agreeing and listening. And I am trying to be clear with people. I hear you. I understand what you're saying. I don't agree with you, but you were heard. And a lot of people feel like if you don't agree with them, they weren't heard. So just, you know, out there, we can hear you and we can disagree with you at the same time. And that's important, I think, any civil dialogue.
Okay, I'm going to suggest that we'll try and work to get this to Gail, then we can look at it when we come back. That's the way the notice goes out. And it'll still have to go to editing and stuff, but can we do?
Yes.
Okay. That's everybody. All right, so what I would suggest then is that we take our lunch break. And this afternoon, Treasurer Pierce will be with us to talk about the OPEB, and also Jane Mitchell, who is the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
See you all at 1.
Bye, Sarah.